The ornate hearing room of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform had witnessed countless confrontations between lawmakers and corporate executives over the decades, but few had prepared the assembled representatives, staffers, and C-SPAN viewers for what was about to unfold on that crisp Wednesday morning in October 2025. Congresswoman Katie Porter sat quietly at the curved committee desk, her famous whiteboard resting against her chair, still covered by its protective cloth. In front of her lay a neat stack of financial documents, SEC filings, and corporate annual reports that she had spent the previous weekend analyzing with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made her one of the most feared questioners in Congress. Across the room, at the witness table under the bright committee lights, sat David Harrison, CEO of ExxonMobil, one of the world's largest oil companies. Harrison had come to Washington that day confident and prepared, armed with talking points developed by his company's army of communications consultants and a PowerPoint presentation filled with charts and graphs designed to showcase ExxonMobil's supposed commitment to environmental responsibility. What happened in the next 18 minutes didn't just expose the mathematical reality behind corporate environmental claims. It became a masterclass in how basic arithmetic could demolish years of carefully crafted corporate propaganda, and why sometimes the most powerful tool in holding corporations accountable is nothing more than a whiteboard and someone who knows how to use it. But Porter wasn't just questioning a CEO that day. She was challenging the entire system of corporate greenwashing that allowed companies to make grand environmental claims while their actual financial commitments told a very different story. Before we dive into this incredible mathematical takedown, hit that like button and subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of corporate accountability and economic justice that American democracy needs. Trust me, you won't want to miss how a former law professor uses basic math to expose corporate lies in ways that no amount of expensive pride will defend against. To understand the magnitude of what happened that day, you need to know who these two people were and why this confrontation represented something much bigger than a simple congressional hearing. Katie Porter had built her career on the principle that complex financial systems could be made understandable through careful analysis and clear explanation. A graduate of Yale Law School and Harvard College, she had spent years as a law professor at UC Irvine, specializing in bankruptcy law and consumer finance. Her academic work focused on how ordinary people were affected by corporate financial practices that were often deliberately obscured through complex terminology and misleading presentations. When Porter was elected to Congress in 2018, she brought with her not just legal expertise, but a commitment to using that expertise in service of ordinary Americans who were often left out of policy discussions dominated by corporate lobbyists and industry insiders. Her approach was simple, but devastatingly effective. Take corporate claims, examine them against actual financial data, and present the results in terms that anyone could understand. Porter's whiteboard had become legendary in Washington. Unlike other members of Congress who relied on staff-prepared questions or political talking points, Porter did her own homework. She analyzed financial statements, calculated percentages, and prepared mathematical presentations that cut through corporate spin with surgical precision. Her questions weren't designed to generate sound bites or political theater. They were designed to reveal truth. Over her years in Congress, Porter had used her mathematical approach to expose banking practices that harmed consumers, pharmaceutical pricing schemes that enriched executives while burdening patients, and housing policies that benefited developers while leaving families homeless. Each time, her method was the same: gather the data, do the math, and present the results clearly and undeniably. David Harrison, by contrast, represented everything that Porter had spent her career fighting against. As CEO of ExxonMobil since 2019, Harrison had presided over a company that had become synonymous with climate denial, environmental destruction, and corporate irresponsibility. But Harrison was also a master of modern corporate communication, skilled at using carefully selected statistics and misleading presentations to create the impression of environmental progress, while his company continued to prioritize fossil fuel profits over planetary health. Harrison had spent weeks preparing for this hearing with ExxonMobil's communications team. They had anticipated difficult questions about climate change, environmental damage, and corporate responsibility. They had prepared responses that acknowledged these concerns while positioning ExxonMobil as part of the solution rather than the problem. The centerpiece of Harrison's strategy was ExxonMobil's supposed massive investment in clean energy and carbon reduction technologies. The company had spent millions on advertising campaigns highlighting these investments, using terms like unprecedented commitment, industry-leading innovation, and transformational change to describe their environmental efforts. But Porter had spent her weekend doing something that few members of Congress bothered to do. She had read ExxonMobil's actual financial reports, analyzed their investment patterns, and calculated what their massive investment really meant in the context of their overall business operations. The hearing began with opening statements from committee leadership, setting the stage for what was billed as an examination of corporate environmental responsibility in the 21st century. Harrison was one of several CEOs testifying, but everyone in the room knew that the real confrontation would come when Porter got her turn to ask questions. Harrison's opening statement was a polished performance, delivered with the confidence of someone who had given similar presentations to shareholders, industry groups, and friendly media outlets dozens of times. He spoke passionately about ExxonMobil's commitment to environmental stewardship, their investments in carbon capture technology, and their leadership in developing cleaner energy solutions. ExxonMobil is proud to be at the forefront of the energy transition, Harrison declared, clicking through slides that showed wind turbines, solar panels, and smiling workers in hard hats. We have committed billions of dollars to renewable energy research and development, making us one of the largest clean energy investors in the industry. The presentation was impressive, filled with compelling visuals and carefully selected statistics that painted ExxonMobil as an environmental leader rather than a fossil fuel giant responsible for decades of climate damage. Harrison spoke with conviction about his company's unprecedented investment in clean technologies and their massive commitment to carbon reduction. But Porter was taking notes, not just on what Harrison was saying, but on the specific numerical claims he was making. As a law professor, she had learned that the most effective way to challenge misleading arguments was not through rhetoric or political attacks, but through careful analysis of the actual facts behind the claims. When Harrison finished his presentation and the committee chair recognized Porter for her questions, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Porter was known for her methodical approach and her ability to cut through corporate spin with mathematical precision. Harrison had been briefed about her reputation, but like many corporate executives, he assumed that his media training and corporate communications expertise would be sufficient to handle whatever questions she might ask. Porter began quietly, almost conversationally. "Mr. Harrison, thank you for being here today. I want to start by confirming some of the claims you just made in your opening statement." She consulted her notes. "You said that ExxonMobil has made a massive investment in clean energy technologies. You mentioned billions of dollars committed to renewable energy research. You described this as an unprecedented commitment that makes ExxonMobil one of the largest clean energy investors in the industry." Harrison nodded confidently. "That's correct, Congresswoman. We're very proud of our environmental leadership." Porter reached down and uncovered her whiteboard, setting it up on the easel beside her desk. The simple action sent a ripple of anticipation through the hearing room. Everyone knew that when Porter brought out the whiteboard, someone was about to get a mathematical education they wouldn't forget. "Mr. Harrison," Porter continued, picking up a black marker, "I've been reviewing ExxonMobil's financial statements, and I'd like to walk through some numbers with you." She turned to the whiteboard and began writing in clear, bold numbers. ExxonMobil 2024 total revenue, $413.68 billion. "Is that figure correct, Mr. Harrison?" Porter asked, turning back to face him. Harrison glanced at his prepared materials. "Yes, that sounds about right." Porter turned back to the whiteboard and wrote another line. ExxonMobil 2024 clean energy investment, $800 million. "And is this figure accurate? This represents the total amount that ExxonMobil invested in renewable energy research, carbon capture technology, and other clean energy initiatives in 2024, according to your annual report." Harrison looked less comfortable now, but nodded. "Yes, approximately." Porter capped her marker and stepped back from the whiteboard, revealing the two figures side by side. The contrast was stark even before she began her calculation. So let me make sure I understand this correctly, Mr. Harrison. You're telling this committee and the American people that $800 million represents a massive investment in clean energy? Harrison tried to maintain his confident demeanor. $800 million is a substantial commitment to environmental technology, Congresswoman. Porter picked up her marker again and began writing a simple division problem on the whiteboard. $800 million, $413.68 billion solos. She worked through the calculation methodically, showing each step clearly for the cameras and the audience. When she finished, she circled the result, 0.19%. The hearing room was silent as the mathematical reality of ExxonMobil's massive investment became clear. Porter turned back to Harrison, her voice calm but carrying the weight of incontrovertible mathematical evidence. Mr. Harrison, your massive investment in clean energy represents exactly 0.19% of your company's total revenue. That's not even 0.2%. Harrison tried to respond, but Porter continued, her tone becoming more pointed as she drove home the significance of the calculation. To put this in perspective that regular Americans can understand, Porter said, turning back to the whiteboard, the average American household spends about 2 months per year on coffee. If that household has an annual income of 50 bis, they're spending 4% of their income on coffee. She wrote the comparison on the whiteboard. Average American coffee spending, 4% of income. ExxonMobil clean energy investment, 0.19% of revenue. The visual was devastating. Porter had reduced ExxonMobil's carefully crafted environmental messaging to a simple mathematical reality that anyone could understand. So, Mr. Harrison, Porter said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just demolished a corporate narrative with basic arithmetic. When you tell the American people that 0.19% represents a massive investment, are you suggesting that most Americans are making a massive investment in their caffeine consumption? The hearing room erupted in barely suppressed laughter, but Porter wasn't finished. She had more mathematics to share. Actually, Mr. Harrison, let me correct myself, Porter said, returning to her calculation. I want to be completely accurate here. She erased the 0.19% and recalculated more precisely. Your clean energy investment is actually 0.193% of total revenue. But since we're talking about investments versus operational expenses, let me look at this differently. Porter turned to a new section of the whiteboard and wrote, ExxonMobil, 2024, fossil fuel exploration investment, $23.8 billion. Harrison's face went pale as he realized where this calculation was heading. So your company invested $23.8 billion in finding and developing new fossil fuel reserves while investing $800 million in clean energy alternatives. Let's see what that ratio looks like. Porter worked through the division. $23.8 billion, $800 million, and this was 29.75. She circled the result and turned back to Harrison. Mr. Harrison, for every dollar your company invested in clean energy, you invested almost $30 in finding more fossil fuels to burn. Does that sound like a company leading the energy transition? Harrison tried to respond, his media training kicking in as he attempted to pivot to talking points about the complexity of energy markets and the need for diverse investment strategies. But Porter cut through his corporate speak with mathematical precision. Mr. Harrison, I'm not asking for a corporate communications response. I'm asking about basic mathematics. You came here today claiming that ExxonMobil is making a massive investment in clean energy. The actual numbers show that you're spending 30 times more money on fossil fuel exploration than on clean energy development. She turned back to the whiteboard and added one more calculation. Clean energy investment as percentage of fossil fuel investment, 3.36%. So your massive investment in clean energy represents 3.36% of what you're spending to find more oil and gas. If I told you I was making a massive investment in healthy eating while spending 30 times more on junk food, would you consider that a credible commitment to nutrition? The analogy landed perfectly, reducing ExxonMobil's environmental claims to an absurdity that anyone could understand. Harrison sat there, clearly unprepared for this level of mathematical scrutiny, unable to defend numbers that spoke for themselves. But Porter had saved her most devastating calculation for last. "Mr. Harrison, there's one more number I'd like to discuss with you," Porter said, her tone becoming more serious. "ExxonMobil's own scientists have calculated that burning all of your company's current fossil fuel reserves would release approximately 50 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere." She wrote the number on the whiteboard: 50 billion tons CO2 from ExxonMobil reserves. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has determined that humanity can emit no more than 500 billion tons of additional CO2 if we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and avoid catastrophic climate change. She added the second number: remaining global carbon budget, 500 billion tons. The calculation was simple and terrifying. ExxonMobil reserves equals 10% of remaining global carbon budget. Porter turned back to Harrison, her voice carrying the weight of mathematical certainty about the climate crisis. "Mr. Harrison, your company alone possesses fossil fuel reserves that represent 10% of the entire remaining carbon budget for the planet. And you're telling us that spending 0.19% of your revenue on clean energy represents environmental leadership?" She paused, letting the mathematics sink in before delivering her final point. If ExxonMobil were serious about addressing climate change, wouldn't the obvious step be to stop exploring for new fossil fuels rather than spending 30 times more on exploration than on clean energy alternatives? Harrison attempted one final response, falling back on industry talking points about energy security and economic necessity. But Porter had already accomplished what she set out to do. She had used simple mathematics to expose the gap between ExxonMobil's environmental rhetoric and their actual business practices. "Mr. Harrison," Porter concluded, "I appreciate your time today, but I think the American people deserve better than corporate greenwashing disguised as environmental leadership. The mathematics don't lie, even when corporate communications departments do." The exchange was over, but its impact was just beginning. Within minutes of Porter's mathematical takedown, clips of her whiteboard presentation were circulating on social media. The hashtag #PorterMath began trending as users shared the devastating calculations that had exposed ExxonMobil's environmental claims as corporate propaganda. Environmental groups praised Porter's approach as a model for how to challenge corporate greenwashing with factual precision rather than political rhetoric. Business schools began incorporating the exchange into their curricula as an example of how financial analysis could be used to evaluate corporate sustainability claims. For Harrison and ExxonMobil, the consequences were immediate and severe. The company's stock price dropped as investors realized that their environmental messaging wouldn't withstand mathematical scrutiny. Environmental advocacy groups used Porter's calculations in lawsuits, challenging ExxonMobil's advertising claims. Regulatory agencies began demanding more detailed financial disclosures about environmental investments. More importantly, Porter's mathematical approach sparked a broader conversation about corporate accountability and the need for rigorous analysis of environmental claims. Her whiteboard had become a powerful tool for cutting through corporate spin and revealing the mathematical reality behind environmental promises. The exchange also demonstrated something crucial about democratic accountability: that sometimes the most powerful tool for holding corporations responsible isn't complex legislation or regulatory enforcement, but simple mathematics presented clearly and honestly. Young activists embraced Porter's mathematical approach as a model for challenging corporate power with factual precision. Her method proved that you didn't need to be anti-business to hold businesses accountable. You just needed to be accurate about what their numbers actually showed. As one environmental economist wrote in the Harvard Business Review, Katie Porter didn't just challenge ExxonMobil's environmental claims, she demonstrated how mathematical literacy can serve as a tool for democratic accountability in an era of corporate greenwashing. The lesson was clear. In corporate America, numbers don't lie, but companies often do. And sometimes it takes a former law professor with a whiteboard to remind everyone that 0.2% is not a massive investment. It's what most Americans spend on coffee, and a whole lot less than what oil companies spend on finding more fossil fuels to burn. If this story inspired you like it inspired millions of Americans who believe in corporate accountability and environmental justice, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share this video with everyone who wants to see real mathematical analysis cut through corporate propaganda. This is exactly the kind of rigorous fact-checking and economic justice that American democracy needs. Let us know in the comments what you thought of Porter's incredible mathematical takedown, and don't forget to check out our other videos about the real heroes who are using facts and evidence to hold powerful interests accountable. The lesson was unforgettable. In America, math trumps marketing every time. But sometimes it takes a congresswoman with a whiteboard to remind corporate executives that their numbers need to add up to something more than creative accounting and environmental propaganda. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. All events, conversations, and scenarios depicted are completely imaginary. Any resemblance to real people, events, or situations is purely coincidental. This content does not represent actual news or factual reporting.